Hello, welcome to the first edition of SFI Not So Live. It's January 2024. Happy New Year to all of our listeners. We hope you're suitably rested during the Christmas period. I'm sure you're not on the day after Christmas Eve. New Year's Eve, if you listen to us on New Year's Day. We're going to start the year off with a high, and we're welcoming back a special guest. We'll introduce her in just a second. But before we do that, let's go across the room. Tony, welcome back. You've had a month off. Welcome back. And just a quick introduction for any new listeners, please.
Yes, Happy New Year, everybody. My name's Tony Hall. I am Head of Business Development here at Saffron, and my role is all about ensuring that the society delivers its lending objectives, and we do that through strong relationships with our brokers. So my job is to ensure that we create that and the business delivers the service that requires.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tony. And Phil, welcome back. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Phil Lawford. I'm the Saffron's National Account Manager, and I'm responsible for the relationship management of our key intermediary and broker trading partners.
And another stalwart of the podcast, obviously. Welcome, Phil. And our special guest is a returning guest. She was with us, I can't remember what month it was now. She was with us last year to talk about the rental reform bill and EPZ rates and a few other things. Got very involved in conversation, very interesting conversation. And as I'm sure everyone knows, we had a little bit of a change of plan from the government, a little bit of a roadback. We'll talk about that shortly. So welcome to the podcast, Perdip. A quick introduction to the audience, please.
Thank you. Happy New Year to everybody. I hope you've had a really nice rested break and are ready for a great 2024. So for those of you who don't know who I am a senior solicitor, senior associate at Black Solicitors. We specialise in buy-to-let transactions, acting for lenders and a wide range of clients.
Wonderful. And your expertise on these first two stories will be very well received, I'm sure. Before we start, I'll do the caveats in a minute. Before we start, Tony, you missed out on December's edition of SFI Not So Live. I believe he was partying, so don't feel sorry for him. But so we missed out on your predictions and your thoughts. But actually, what we're going to do that at the end. But can you just give us a little rundown of what 2023 felt like for Tony Hall and what a bit of an analysis of how the year felt? Because I think we had some really good points put forward from Leslie, Phil, and our guest Jesper. But it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, certainly. Look, 2023 for me personally and the team has been another really positive year. We are probably, we've certainly done our targets and are heading for a record lending year for the end of this year, which is super exciting. And on kind of like third year in a row. My team is now expanded to there is now how many? 15 of us, with effect from the 14th of December. So you go back to when we started this podcast and there was two of us. That's quite good in the last 2.5 years. So that's brilliant. And the relationship we've got with our distribution and our partners is stronger than ever and is growing every day. It's interesting, and I don't know whether Phil might have mentioned this, but we used to attend events and it would start with never heard of you, don't know who you are, what do you do? Yeah, so which is cool, you expect that. And last year it kind of changed to I kind of know who you are, but I still haven't used you. And now they're coming over and at a recent event and thanking my team for their support. And that's the evolution of us. But that's what Saffron for me intermediaries is all about. It's about having mutual beneficial relationships. Our business development team are there to develop our partners' business, not just ours. So it's great to get that recognition of thanks. So that's been a big part of this year. Lots of other things. Our underwriters have learned what phones are and now use them and enjoy using them and are speaking to brokers, which is fantastic. We've had massive feedback about that. And, we're kind of, this year's been great because we're kind of honing in on what it is we want to be. Which is really focusing on complex lending, either complex incomes or complex property. So next year is going to be really exciting as we start to build that out more and get known for more of that. So it's just been an exciting year. And I think the crowning glory is another two awards in the bag, with the best one being Building Society of the Year, which is the third year out of the last four we've won that. So that's just, thank you very much, Perdip. That is a super achievement for everybody, not just in Saffron for intermediaries, but the whole business to deliver that. So that probably crowns the year for me. Really.
Wonderful. And I just want to say something I didn't really say on the last podcast, Tony, but a bit of a thank you to our listeners, because SFI Not So Live, it's always been a project we're really, really proud of, and something we've always thought of. And, we know we have an audience, and, we really enjoy what we talk about. But to get to a number one slot as the number one mortgage podcast in the UK, that was quite a testament, really, to something we never really thought about, which is how much we put into this. But it's just so natural that we're actually starting to get accolades for something that we do. That is just when it started. And so please close your ears. It started as a bit of a project. It was a bit of it was like a hobby project for a career, wasn't it? And look at it now. I mean, I'm super pleased with it. I'm sure you're the same.
Yeah, I am, and thank you for reminding me. That was an amazing achievement that I didn't just tell you about. So, but for the listeners' benefit, it is January the 1st. You know what comes the day before. That's when my head's a bit like this and my voice is deeper than it normally is. So that's my excuses for why I couldn't remember something so earth-shattering.
There we go. Right. So for everyone listening, thank you. For us, we want to grow on that in 2024, and our special guest today is going to help us launch 2024 really, really well, I'm sure. Just the caveats, normal caveats as per usual. We are recording at the end of the year, so we don't know what's going to happen next year, so a lot of what we're doing is guessing. A lot of the rates, we do talk about rates or certain things, may be slightly out of date by the time you listen, and obviously some of these comments are that of our personal comments as opposed to that of the people who employ us. So with those caveats out the way, Perdip, it's time for you to shine, because we had the most brilliant explanation of the Renters Reform Bill for you last time, that I think Phil and I sat with our jaws open while you talked, going, that's really interesting. It was incredible. But this year, has seen a little bit of a kind of what we talked about being pulled back on a little bit by this government. They're getting a little bit worried and a little bit concerned about what the impacts might have been. So perhaps what might be quite nice to summarize what you discussed last year, but also just give the brokers a little bit of an idea of how it's affecting those who are entering or in the buy-to-let market, what's happening. Because it is a positive in some respects, maybe not for the renters, but perhaps a positive for the landlords. So just a bit of a summary from you, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for being so kind, firstly. It is a lot of detail in these bills and any proposals that the government's looking to review. So it does seem that it's a chunky document, and unfortunately it means that once they've gone back to review, there are going to be amendments, hence we're in the position that we are in today. So I'm going to speak to you obviously about the changes of the EPC and then also the Renters Reform Bill. So it may be slightly lengthy. So going back to what you said first, what were the initial proposals? So the changes in the EPC requirements, the initial proposals required all tenancies to have an EPC rating of C by the end of 2025 and all existing tenancies to comply by 2028. So that was the change. It was going to change from a minimum rating of E to C by 2025 initially. However, the government, being the government, have decided to scrap these plans, unfortunately for some, but fortunately for others. So depending on how you work within the industry, you will be affected by this. So the point is that there is no longer going to be a change to that minimum rating. It will remain a rating of E for the foreseeable future. Just going on to the Renters Reform Bill. So this is the slightly longer bill, and this is a lot more detailed. Just to provide you with a bit of background, again, just as you'd mentioned in the beginning, Jay, we did discuss the proposal in the last podcast. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, if you want to go back and revisit that, it would give you the background information as to the bill in a lot more detail than I'm going to cover at this particular stage. So please do listen back if you do get a chance. But there have been some significant changes that have been made. So the whole point behind the Renters Reform Bill is to bring reform, which a lot of people have argued the area in the law is actually quite outdated. So it's bringing standards for renters in line with the standards of the properties, in line with planning, in line with legislation, and in line with regulations. So that was the whole point of it. And also, it's part of the original plan for the government to improve the quality, the affordability and the fairness of the private rental sector, which they call levelling up. So on October the 20th, the government reviewed the first draft of the plan and made some rather key significant changes. The first significant change that I want to talk to you about is in relation to Section 21 of the Housing Act 1988. Now, this is commonly known as no-fault evictions. So you may recall from the previous podcast that we talked a lot about the fact that the government are looking to abolish Section 21. And just to let you know what Section 21 is, it's the landlord's statutory right. So under legislation, the landlord can serve the tenant with a notice of possession after the fixed term of the tenancy has ended. So obviously, if it's a 6-month tenancy, you have to wait for that 6 months to have been completed. At that point, landlord can serve the tenant with a notice for 2 months to say that they would like to regain possession of that property. The landlord does not need to provide a reason to action a Section 21 notice and repossess. And that's a significant part of Section 21, hence it was called, or it has been commonly known as the no-fault evictions. So the plan was to abolish this. The government have now changed that and have decided not to abolish it, which means that the landlords will still have the right to serve that Section 21 notice under the terms of this rental reform bill if it is passed as it has been reconsidered. There is no indication on how long the reviews are going to take, but what the government have said is that it's not going to be abolished until sufficient progress has been made to improve the courts and the justice system.
I've got so many questions. I'm sure the guys have. That was really, really informative. I can see everyone's making notes. So I'm not going to ask my questions yet. It's not about me. But Phil, just based on what Perdip's just analysed there, let's just pick it apart a little bit. Let's go right back to the start and talk about the EPC rating stuff first. We're big fans of green here. We always have been. Yeah. And we talk a lot about, the housing market being a big impact on the environmental impacts on the planet. I know you've got an opinion on this, Phil, so I'm going to come to you first. But, it's maybe good for the landlord, worse for the planet, not so good for the renter, is the way I took it. I mean, that from my personal opinion, I'd just like to point out. So what about you, Phil?
Yeah, look, I think we've said this before. Whichever side of the fence you're on regarding the private rental sector, and whether that's right, that it should be what it is, whether we like it or not, the private rental sector is a really, really important component of the housing market, because it is, and it's had to fill a gap that's been there for lack of social housing for the last, 30, 40 odd years. So the private rental sector is important. So, and on reflection, I think some of probably the EPC expectations for them to do in the timescales were probably unrealistic. So I can get why it was probably scrapped, because if it wasn't going to happen anyway, then what was the point of it sort of dragging on? But it does feel very much like there's a lot of kicking the can down the road by the present government, and there's probably going to be some sweeping up to happen in the next iteration of Parliament, whatever.
Let's come back to discuss the renters reform and come back to the politics of it.
I'm disappointed that there was nothing else to say. Yeah, we're not going to do this, but we're going to do something else instead. It was a bit of kicking the can down the road that I was most disappointed with from a sort of planet bit. So that's my synopsis. Yeah.
Tony, yourself?
On EPC, yeah, it's disappointing. The focus is all again on, and I say this a lot about, it's all again on the money side of things, and we're forgetting the reason for all of this, which is about ensuring there's a planet for us to stay on, and our families and our kids to stay on, and everybody forgets all of that in these scenarios. So anything that stops us killing ourselves is bad. Right, that's the straightforward view for me. However, you've got a lot of other things to sort out. So it's disappointing. I think it would have been a massive challenge for landlords because the basic standard of housing in the UK is poor anyway. So and actually to retrofit it all is not commercially viable, which is why you've seen wholesale selling of properties because there's just no point in retrofitting them again against this current cost of living background as well. So it's a sigh of relief there, but we're kind of missing the point. The point is if we don't do something, there's not going to be a tomorrow.
No.
You know?
Let's move on to the Renters Reform Bill, and we'll discuss that between the three of us as well. So, Perdip, you gave us a really good outlook of that. I didn't know some of the bits in there, so that was really interesting for me. But the one that we really focused on last time, if you remember, was Section 21. We'll get it right this time, hey, Phil. Section 21, we thought it was Section 28. And Section 21. Now, I completely understand where this is coming from, and I completely understand why they pulled back on it. But I also see it from both sides of the fence here, and that landlords will need a way, will look for, will require a way out. But likewise, there are tenants who with children who suddenly get evicted with no plans ahead, 2 months to sort themselves out, and then you find that actually this person's going to pay more rent. I just don't agree with that practice. So it needs something to keep an eye on. And I'm not dissing landlords because they're the majority we discussed last time, 98% of landlords are good landlords. It's just those other ones that are out there that the law leaves open. So, Tony, on Section 21, abolish it, keep it?
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard. That's why the bill hasn't quite nailed it yet, have they? Because you've got lobbyists on both sides of the equation, haven't you? I can see a landlord going, actually, using this current example of, actually, I don't want to be a landlord anymore. I want to sell my property. I want to not do this. Yeah, if you bring in legislation that stops them doing that when they want to do it, that seems unfair. But also to the point of families, etc., getting very short notice to find somewhere else to live, and that happening on multiple occasions potentially, as unfair as well. So I think it's a no-win situation, but they've just got to make up their minds what they want to do and then deal with it. I don't think there's a right or a wrong because you've got two sides of the coin, really. But the government, whichever government gets to do this, just needs to decide something and then deal with the consequences of their decision.
Do you think that Section 21 needs some, open to everybody on this question, really, do you think it needs some sets of examples? So rather than it being a standardized, get rid of it, you can't do this. As Tony was saying, if they want to sell up, that's perfectly acceptable. But if you're going to bring someone out just because somebody's offered you a higher rent, that's not acceptable. If you're a family, you should give them longer. Do you think there's just one section? Do you think it needs more detail? Does it need some scenario detail? Is it getting too complicated?
Yeah, I think definitely. Sorry, Phil.
No, so yeah, I think Perdip made the point that the big problem is the court system is broken. So you, before you do anything, you've got to sort the court system quickly, because if that whole court system's not working and that is all slowed down because for whatever reasons, that's not, it means it's not functioning properly. You've got to sort that first before you sort anything, because otherwise, if you speed it up, if it gets clogged in the system, then it's not going to go anywhere. So it's all about that balance of fairness, isn't it? I mean, I've been a tenant, and I found it incredibly difficult to get a let property that I wanted at the time because I was between houses. So rental was the right thing for me, but I got a cat. And I got 3 children, and I found it really, really hard. And I wasn't on benefits or anything like that. I was trying to live in a reasonable area close to my kids' school, and it was really bloody difficult to get a rental property. So I can see both sides of the coin as well, and
With the way that Section 21 works, it's like a one-size-fits-all for the property industry, and that's the whole point of it. And the point is that if you serve that Section 21 notice and there is a dispute, which the tenant can reverse with a counter, so and that dispute is not being managed in a timely fashion. Many of the reasons why, and I speak to landlords and ask them, well, why do you want to go down this particular route? And people have various different reasons. It's not necessarily just that they're going to be able to get a higher rent, which yes, some people do, but it's just many people just changing their mind and they don't want to be a landlord anymore. Exactly what you'd said, Tony. People do not want to risk their investments at this day and age because they're not really sure what's going to happen. And they can see the fluctuating terms, they can see fluctuating profits in their investments, and it's not providing with the yields that they want. And that's the reason why they want to come out of that particular tenancy agreement. And then you have the flip side of the tenant that then has to look for somewhere within a 2-month period, and they have all the restrictions, just as you'd mentioned, Phil, of children, of pets, and all the various other restrictions in getting somewhere. And the court system currently, as it stands, from what the government is saying, is not adequate enough to deal with those disputes. Now, I completely agree. If the system is not correct, we need to fix the system first in order to be able to deal with that. If Section 21 is going to be abolished, then they do need to come up with another option within the bill that is going to cover the one-size-fits-all. Currently, that particular point is not covered under the mandatory grounds and it's not covered under discretionary grounds. But then, just to play devil's advocate here, how do you possibly come up with another version of the one-size-fits-all if that genuinely does just fit every scenario possibly? Mm-hmm. It's one of those situations where how can you do that? Yeah. Is it achievable?
Yeah.
Potentially not, I would assume, because currently it was brought in the Housing Act for the situations that were not covered by the specific points within legislation. So if you couldn't find a ground under the current sections, you could still use Section 21.
Okay, just quickly then to the gentleman from Perdip very kindly talked about what she's seen in the market. How's the market been for you guys? Your buy-to-letters, you lend to buy-to-lets. How's it been for you? Have you seen any change in the market since before this change, before and after the government rolled back? Any difference? Anything you're hearing from the brokers?
It's definitely, from broker feedback, a tough market for them at the moment. For us, we are incredibly busy with expat buy-to-lets. So there's still a lot of interesting in overseas, expats buying property in the UK. That's a significant part of our buy-to-let portfolio. So that's kind of strong. We've seen, because of the way our calculations work, we're really good with remortgaging because of the way the ICR is covered with us. So we've seen quite a bit of remortgaging as people are coming off deals, because that's the biggest challenge in the market is the affordability. Rental yields are not matching the affordability challenge, and therefore that's stimulating activity, but also quite a lot of selling. But also that, as we'll come on to, the market is 53% down this year for all of these issues.
Well, Phil very kindly in his response, we'll come into the politics in a bit, because all of these things we're going to talk about could completely change if we have a general election this year and if we have a Labour government come in as opposed to the Conservatives. They've already voiced a lot of opinions on some of the things we've already discussed, let alone what we're about to discuss. So we'll have a chat about what we think that might be towards the end of this. But let's move on to the story in The Guardian, which was the rather contentious speech from Michael Gove that wasn't done in the House of Parliament, was done in private setting, but where he's threatening legal action, and Perdip couldn't ask for a better person to be on this one, because you've got an understanding of the law against his English councils over housing plans. Now, we discussed so many times on this podcast how we need more houses to be built. We understand that. Labour come under a bit of pressure over saying it was used some greenbelt land. People thinking they were going to plant or start building on like actual greenbelt land, but it wasn't. It was concrete over car parks that were listed in that way, and they were saying, "Look, why are we using that? Let's get rid of that. Let's build on that." So there's some sort of misunderstandings here, but analysing what Gove said, he looks like he wants to try and drive that forward, and we'll come on to the housing part in a minute. But we do need housing, so we do need reform, surely. I mean, is there a need for reform to get these houses built? That's a question for all of you.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, mate. The planning system is fundamentally knackered, I think is the
It's
professional phrase.
archaic, isn't it?
It's out of date. And he's right around local councils. Talking from one element of planning reform, which is around right to build, and the fact that local councils have a statutory right to deliver the amount of planning permission that's relevant in the area for the people that want it, and pretty much every single one of them is not doing that and is ignoring their statutory duty. So he's quite right to threaten local authorities over you're just not playing the game. You're just making it up as you go along, and it's always been an annoyance of mine, because if we do something wrong in our world, we have a regulator that comes down and makes sure that we don't do it again, and everybody else doesn't do it again. Whereas local authorities seem to be able to do whatever they want, and that doesn't seem right to me. So it's funny, we've got all the land in this country that we need, because we only actually build on 1.3% of available land in Britain. 1.3%. However, it's not the land that's the problem for us. It is the planning permission. It's the plots. That's the problem. The finance is there. There's loads of lenders lending on new houses, old houses, self-built houses. That's not the issue. The issue is planning reform to get plots out faster, quicker, so people can build houses.
I couldn't agree more, to be honest with you, and I think we have a lot of conversations about it. But part of this story is the government have been coming under attack for the whole year this year about housing targets, and they're there, they're not, they're watering them down, they're less, and it's got to stage. But also there are some impacts, let's be honest, with the home builders as well. They've been affected by labour shortages, costing and rising costs of materials, which we're going to come into later when we look at the quality of what they're building. So there are other elements in this, but Perdip, what can we do to encourage the local councils to back down? I mean, obviously, having a housing secretary helps if he's coming down on them, but can we fight any of those decisions? Is there anything we can do to speed these things along a bit?
So I suppose it depends on, obviously, the government's plans in terms of reforms. You asked the initial question, do we think that reform is required? I definitely think it's necessary. We at Blacks actually have specialist planning solicitors that deal with these issues on a daily basis. And I was speaking to them about this statement when it came out, and I just recall conversations of the fact that reform is required. Reform is probably a late response from the government, and it should have been done quite a long time ago. And I completely agree with your comments, Tony, that accountability is necessary and it is key. So it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. One thing we can all agree on is that reform is necessary. So that the way that the statement was set out, it was the government's plans to reform the planning system, and obviously to build more homes. And yes, we're all aware the target is 300,000 additional homes a year. But that statement was then accompanied by the National Planning Policy Framework, which actually sets out the government's planning policies for England and how they should be applied. And that's what contains the accountability. So the overarching message really was that local authorities need to put up to-date local plans in place that then make them build quicker and more effectively, in order so that they can actually have a better control of how many houses are built and where the need is within their council. So it could be that there isn't a particular need and they can identify that, but at least they can identify that in a way that they are held accountable if in the event that that is completely incorrect. It also then shows where they need to be building and what types of properties they need to be building. But unless they actually open up and disclose this information, when nobody's going to know where that need particularly is. So like I said, the point is really to have an open disclosure as to where that need is. It's to make sure that authorities that are doing the right thing are not held accountable because they're delivering in the right way and they're being recognised for the fact that they are effectively controlling and delivering housing in the correct manner. But it also means that the ones that are failing are then pulled up on the accountability factor. So on one hand, the authorities are being given more flexibility when determining the housing need in the future. But then on the other hand, obviously, the government are threatening direct action to intervene where plans that have been disclosed have not actually been met. So what has actually happened under the terms of this? Michael Gove has written to seven of the worst authorities in terms of plan making, requiring them to publish a planned timetable within that 12-week period. And then they stated further intervention will follow if they fail to do so. Now, accountability is key. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see what the further intervention will be at that particular point. We agree accountability is key, but then how will they be held accountable? And it all goes back to the point that everybody does agree that reform is genuinely necessary.
100%.
Yeah.
And actually, the government have made a run for their own back here, because they have, I don't know if you've seen on the following on a mortgage strategy, but actually they've cut local authority budget by so much there's nobody in the departments anymore to do the work that they want them to do. So actually, I'm not playing devil's advocate because I do believe it needs reform. I'm not, but somebody has to stand up for the local councils in that there's bugger all people in them now, because they've cut their budget so much they can't do anything with the local councils anymore. So actually, the government have made a rod for their own back, and now they haven't got the councils because they've reduced the numbers because they haven't got the budget. I mean, I find the whole thing so complex with regards to spending that that actually, how Phil, I think you agree with me, but how can they do all this work if they haven't got the people to do it?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, in the councils are now blaming the government for there's uncertainty around housing policy. So it just goes, so it really comes down, for me, it comes from the top down. You've got to have a strong, strong leadership and a strong plan. This is what we're going to do, and you're going to do it. And here are the resources to do it. And it's just not there. And why is he talking about it now? What we've done for the last 13 years, or whatever.
Well, think of all those billions we wasted on HS2 that could have gone into planning reform.
It's a kind of worms we should open on here. I think we'll all be here a week.
You could have had 100 planners in every local council in Britain, probably minimum in each one, for the costs of that. But hey, we won't get into that.
I'm not allowed to go into politics because I rant and I get told off for it. So
politics, that's just stupidity. But
sometimes I wonder if politics and stupidity lie hand in hand sometimes. Well, that leads us on really well to this next story, actually, because I just sort of touched on it on purpose when I said about house builders. But more than half think that older houses are better quality than new builds, is the header on the Mortgage Solutions. Now, I have to agree. I realise nobody on this podcast can see, but I live in a relatively new house. When I moved in and I bought the house, it was very badly insulated. It is so thinly built together. It felt like I was inside a cardboard box. I felt like the big bad came, we could blow it over. So I can see. And I moved from a Victorian terrace that was a solid, warm. It was horrible in the summer, but there is a lot to be said here. But there's a reduction, and I think we have to look at this in several different ways, I suppose. But you guys have read the story. Tony, come to you first. I mean, we're trying to make a new housing market that is sustainable for the planet and sustainable for the people that live in it. Are we going to ever achieve this? Are we ever going to be a country where our housing stock is going to be where we need it to be if we're not building the quality of homes and, we're cutting corners to the point where actually come another 20 years' time, these houses are going to be absolutely useless?
Well, it's certainly going to be hard to do it on the way we're currently heading because, but the issue with, the story's talking about is people don't want to buy new houses. At the recent NAXPA conference, we had Richard Bacon, the MP, was talking to us about that only a third of people actually want to buy a house from big builders. Yeah, so only 33% actually want to do it. However, 80% of the market is dominated by big builders. So you have a problem straight away of builders building houses that no one wants to live in. So they're cutting corners because they know that, but they've still got to build these houses and hope they fill them. So, well, I'm not saying cutting corners, but it's you can, new houses, you can see the snagging list all the time, can't you? So that's going to be a challenge unless there is more done to really drive the standard of new housing. The other thing is, I'll get onto the self-build agenda here, is that's one way out of this, is to start increasing the amount of houses that we build ourselves or someone builds for us in custom build. because that is absolutely proven to be the most energy efficient homes going, because that's why they're being built.
Well, if there's 50%
So-
that don't want these new build homes were to build their own or custom build, or self-build or custom build, it really solves the problem slightly, because actually we've not got enough people building a home, enough companies building homes, but we've got individuals building homes. All of a sudden we've got an issue that's being resolved, Tony, surely.
Exactly. But this all links back to the building planning reform needed, because that's what's stopping people building their own homes, is getting access to a plot and the planning to do it. So again, and it's a challenge, and a lot of the land that is available is land banked by the larger builders.
Yeah.
Right. Why? Because they're PLCs with institutional investors that are going, show me your 10-year strategy. So you can't be a big house builder if you've got no land to build on. So you've got to bank it for when you need it.
Yeah, of course.
So it really is a challenge, so I think it is the culmination of all the things we've talked about today. And at some point, the stars need to align in terms of planning, in terms of even rental reform to get houses or people in the right properties. So yeah, it's a key. And look, the biggest thing is, 70% of our housing stock is Victorian anyway, and is not actually the right thing to do to retrofit it, because those houses are designed to breathe, and if you block them up with nice windows and everything else, then they get mouldy, and that creates its own issues. So it really is a bit of a challenge.
Yes. Well, Tony, just sticking with this for a second, because you'll know this more than any of us, because I know you've recently been to these events. How often do self-builders, so if they do find a plot, say they find a plot on an existing road, or it's a knockdown and rebuild, but it's like a fresh self-build, how much do they come across objections from local residents? Do the council stand on the side of the builder, or are they much more swayed to the side of the residents? I think I know the answer to that, but I'm just trying to get a picture of how many people get stymied by local residents when they're trying to self-build on a bit of land that a large purchaser would purchase.
Well, there's always the NIMBYs, isn't there? So you're always going to have that. I mean, Phil might be a better place for this. I suppose from our perspective, we don't really see that, because we need the outline planning permission to be in place at the point of decision in principle and full planning application. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of been through that. But Phil, what's your view on that?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, like Tony says, we get the application when that planning has worked through. So it's not something that comes across my desk. Changing subject slightly, but back to the start of the question, is self and custom build does drive up quality, which would answer some of this first question about the perception of poor quality new build. Because the more individual it is, bespoke to the purchaser's requirements or the builder's requirements, self-builder's requirements, the better quality asset and home you're going to get. So at the conference we recently went to, it was pointed out that the self and custom build sector is actually the fourth largest house builder in the UK collectively now, which was quite astonishing. So
I did not know that.
I think the answer is to grow the custom build sector in particular, because I think that's the single biggest thing that would drive up the quality of new housing in the UK and go some way to meeting demand.
I'm never going to stop talking about this. Our Channel 4 programme regarding the street with custom builds, I think he's on a huge amount, because I think it really knocked on those misconceptions that people had over what a custom build was, and said, actually, you've got flexibility, but they're asked, you can see what the end result's going to be. I think people really warmed to that after that. And more of that, please. Producers of TV, can we have some more of that, please? So, Perdip, you were nodding away, so I didn't know if you wanted to chip in on this part of the conversation. So
No, of course, I completely agree. Be it new build or custom build, I think there's the need for the better reform for planning and building, and that's the point. No, it's the old age question that you have, are old houses better than the new houses? The argument is older houses have stronger foundations, just to put it simply. In order to carry out a fair test, you'd have to test an existing home at a certain age and then wait for that new build to get to that particular age in order to confirm the fairability of the actual fairness test, and then see. And that's just to put it on simple terms. There's various other things you'd have to test. Old homes are considered to be tried and tested. You know what to expect. In terms of a buyer, you can carry out as many checks, as many investigations, inspections, and your surveys to ascertain as much information as possible prior to contracting to purchase. So with a new build, the inquiries are completely different. They're limited in terms of that nature, but more concentrating on the construction, the planning conditions as such. Especially if you're purchasing off plan, because you've not even seen the property. It's not yet been constructed. You've just seen a plan and you like the way it looks, and that's what you're basing your contractual obligations on. And that's quite important, because the inquiries are restricted to the construction. In practice, you're really just getting answers with new builds based upon the factual information contained in the planning documents and various other things. You're not really getting information about the property itself and the quality of that particular property, because you only know the quality of it once you've used it. You know, it's just like purchasing something brand new. Until you've had it for a period of time, over time, you will not know the quality of that that item until you've tried, tested and evaluated it. So that's an argument. On the flip side, again, just to play devil's advocate, new homes can be argued to be better homes purely because simply based on the efficiency points. So again, they are built to better energy efficient standards, the more recent standards, making them cheaper to heat and maintain, as various old homes or older homes are deemed to be slightly less energy efficient because of the appliances and because of the heating systems. The older they are, they require more maintenance. The newer they are, they require fresh maintenance. And that is the assumption. Again, with new builds, because they are subject to more stringent and current regulations, before than so, they are backed up by this particular warranty. So you'll have your new build warranty, which can be utilised in cases of structural defects. So there are positives and negatives for both of the arguments. But I think that regardless of whether it's a new build or an old home or a custom built home, I personally believe that ensuring that the properties are built to a high standard will change the views of individual purchasers. And the suggestion I would give is better regulation, and that's exactly what I said in the beginning, and what Tony had said. Better regulation of the planning and the planning reform, the building reforms, builders' standards and the regulations to ensure that the properties that are being built are consistently being built to a high standard. Because a lot of the complaints that you do see, and I would see from clients, is a few years down the line when they come to resell their property that we have bought with them, their new build purchase, and they have countless amounts of negative points to raise about the construction, and more commonly so, there's a question on the property information form that asks, does the property benefit from a new build warranty? And then at the bottom of that box it also states, have you made any claims? And that box has been filled more so now than it has in previous years. So from a property, from the lawyer's perspective and what I'm seeing, there is a change in that a lot of people are making more claims on their NHBC and LABCs and various different new build property regulations, and they're making claims on that warranty because they are unfortunately experiencing those structural defects that you wouldn't expect. I mean, government stats show that obviously they aim to build that 300,000 new homes to match the demands and they keep the housing costs affordable. But last year they built less than 250,000. Again, I found another stat. According to census information, there were 3.1 million more adults in England, and this is a comparison from 2021 to 2011. So in the 10-year period, population of the adults has increased by 3.1 million. With a need of 2 million homes. But within that 10 years, so within that decade, we've only built, or managed to, as a government, built 1.4 million houses, as opposed to the 2 million that is required. So whether or not we feel that these houses are of poor quality is one particular issue. And obviously, I can see the benefits of both the new builds and the custom builds and old houses. One thing we can all agree on is that we need more housing stock in the UK.
Yeah.
if there's, and we are going to go on to the subject next, there's one thing I want to see for 2024 is just build more and have a strategy to build more, and a real strategy and a real understanding, and seeing that, and not these continued rollbacks. But leads quite nicely on to our final topic.
Jay, sorry, before you go that, build more, but build the right more.
Yeah. Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
If you've got 66% saying I don't want to buy these kind of houses, don't build them. Otherwise, what a waste of natural resources, massive carbon footprint of getting all that there. Build stuff that people want. That's the key.
And affordably, because a lot of the problem is they're not affordable homes. And I mean, I live on the edge of a town here, and a new estate's just being built, and every single house is above a 4-bedroom. We are desperate for small family homes here, starter homes, and there's not one on the new estate that has taken up every single field that I walk my dogs on. Has all gone to this estate. I'm all for it, because I know we need houses, so I didn't argue, I didn't contest it. I did once I saw the plans and realised there were 250 4-bedroom plus houses. I was like,
there is a little reason for that, right? Which is again a feature of a very low interest rate environment for a decade. Yeah, people, first time buyers haven't been buying first time buyer houses. Yeah, they've been buying the forever house straight away because it's been cheap funding, right? That's the problem. Mm-hmm. No one wants to buy the little houses. They all want the 4-bedroom ones, and now they're realising I can't get the 4-bedroom ones, so that we do need to retrofit and build the smaller ones. That's one of the problems.
No, I'm feeling that. Here. Okay, so here we go then. We did this last month, but this is going to slightly different shift in that I want to hear from you, and Perdip will come to you first because you're a different market to the two gentlemen, but just a bit of a prediction of what you think we're going to see in the housing sector from a legal perspective. What you think 2024 is going to bring. We've already touched on this. It's a political year this year because we have got, and not just here, but all over the world, but it's the biggest, I think it's the biggest year of elections in the entire world this year. So we're in for a treat in political news, but we are likely to have a government shift. Hopefully, I mean, we don't know what's going on, but hopefully the election will be this year and not early January 2025. So we can get this over and done with, because I feel like we are in limbo, and I'm pretty sure, Perdip, working in the legal sector, you can completely agree with me there, that we feel a bit limboitic, and we're not quite, decisions aren't quite being made because nobody really knows where this year is going to be. But what do we predict so far, and bearing in mind that it's going to be election year, what do you think we're going to see in the housing sector by way of reform, perhaps?
So in terms of reform, obviously, it's all up in the air, and it all depends on what the government are going to decide. So unfortunately, I can't say exactly what we're going to get. In terms of where the industry is going to take us, and we have had a few indications for the previous months which show the direction that we're going in. So like I said previously, established landlords are assessing those portfolios. So when it comes to buy-to-let properties, they will continue to assess those portfolios and refinance where necessary. So a higher instruction rate in remortgages, and I think those products are the ones that potentially lenders would really need to be concentrating on to make competitive, because they are going to assist those landlords not only refinance their portfolio, but then also purchase the new properties. So I do feel that this is going to strengthen going forward. With new landlords, again, buy-to-let market, they may be a little bit cautious, and this is what you were tapping on there, Jay, the cautious element to expand portfolios and to dip their toes into the water and see exactly what's going to happen until they can see signs of the market strengthening. Now, how can the market strengthen? Simply, buyers are telling us that they want to see better interest rates. And once they can see the change in interest rates, they will feel that they have a stronger market to then enter into. Now, we currently have some clients that are saying to us, hold off completion for another month so that we feel that we can confidently go back and either renegotiate purchase prices, or they feel that lenders are going to be creating more competitive products and prices. And that is the direction that we're going in. So we've actually had clients holding off completing transactions on this basis. That's one indication that there's positivity, that there's going to be a change for this year. And also, the second indication that I can talk about is, interestingly, I was looking at a mortgage offer for a client a couple of days ago and noticed a difference in the early repayment charge conditions, which is quite significant. So normally, for example, on a a 5-year fixed rate product, normally you would see a breakdown of the percentages that are going to be charged on your early repayment each year. So for a 5-year product, you'll see year 1, you're charged 5%, year 2, you're charged 4%, year 3, you're charged at 3%, year 4, you're charged at 2%, and year 5, you're then charged at 1% until it then switches over to the variable rate. However, this particular product that I was looking at, year 1, you're charged 3%, year 2, you're charged 5%, year 3, you're charged 4%, year 4, you were charged 3%, and then year 5, you were then charged 2% until the variable rate then kicks in. So interestingly, if you decided to take this particular product, the lender seems to be encouraging borrowers to remortgage in year 1 rather than waiting till year 4. You would pay the exact same early repayment charge. For a lender, that's quite clever because it means you will get a good return on a short-term lend for a quick transaction, and you can turn that investment around. So you don't need to wait until year 4 to obtain your 3% payout, where a lender will get that 3% payout now. And for a borrower, you don't need to wait till year 4, for example, if we have a 3% payout. So I think for that reason, the early repayment charges are quite clever in giving an indication as to how the lenders are behaving in terms of the products. In terms of buyers, like I said, they're telling us that their decisions are guided by the lenders' products. So if lenders out there are going to be making competitive products and they're going to be making competitive offers, then the borrowers are then going to be picking up on these. In terms of lenders, my predictions are, I think you're going to have to be quite competitive, like I said, and I keep saying the same thing. In order to stand out amongst the vast number of lenders in the industry, those products are going to have to be competitive. I do feel that interest rates will come down. I don't think they'll come down considerably. I'm hoping that there will be that fluctuation because ideally, if they do come down, the more products that are being produced will contribute to an increased activity in the property industry. In terms of brokers, I think brokers will have to stay alert and attentive to all these new products and the changes that the lenders are going to be offering. So just like I'd noticed with this one particular mortgage offer, there's a change in the way that the lender is allowing a person to get out of this particular loan within the first year. And normally they would have to wait until the 4th year to receive a reduced early repayment charge. So for that reason, I think the concentration for 2024 is short-term lending with a vast amount of return, and lenders who have long lending periods are also becoming more acute to this particular point.
Tony? You shared, I'm sure you'd like to pick up something, some of the things that Perdip just said there, but you shared this insight with me from UK Finance, which showed where the market had gone in 2023 with some downs and ups, interestingly the ups, but I just for you, you missed the last podcast as well, for really a prediction and what you feel 2024 is going to bring in the lending sphere. Phil, I'm going to change yours up, so beware. So yeah, Tony, just your thoughts?
Well, look, it's going to be another challenging year. You know, we're still in a higher interest rate environment than we've been used to for a decade, and you've got people coming off very low rates onto the new normal, and it is the new normal. I think rates will drop, but I don't think they'll go much lower than until base rate starts to go down. But you might see, I think you'll see some challenge for rates amongst the high street lenders who largely are the rate driven engines. They have to drive the volume, so that's their lever. For lenders like ourselves in the complex income space, rate really isn't our bag. Our rates have got to be there or thereabouts, but we sell on the fact that we offer adaptive solutions. Mm-hmm. So in an environment where more and more people will not hit the stereotypical model of a high street lender, we become a very big solution for that. And that's what we're seeing. That's why our self-employed numbers, for example, have gone up 750% in the last 3 years. And our contractors are up and ourselves. So, people are taking more than one job, are taking multiple incomes, or looking at annexes or property with land because they're trying to do things. A lot of lenders will not do that. That's where we come into our own, because we are flexible and adaptable to look at that kind of lending. So I think for us, but saying that, none of it's easy, because you've got another 30 other building societies trying to do the same thing, right? So it's all about how do you stand out, and that's why we stand out for lots of different reasons I won't go into. So not surprised by the figures this year, that things are down, but arrears and repossessions are kind of up. No surprise, we're in a very cost of living and expensive environment. I'm not surprised that house prices have dropped. Funnily enough, people can't borrow as much, so therefore they can't pay as much for a house, and therefore we're seeing some settling of that market, which is long overdue. And it'll only be for a while, and then it'll go up again, because that's what this market does. When you're as old as me and have seen it a few times, this cycle, you've just got to ride out this, until the next one. Don't try and fight the current. Go with it.
Yeah.
And then eventually you'll come back up again. So it's going to be a challenging year. I'm really excited by it, because I think out of it becomes opportunity for us, and opportunity for customers and brokers who don't think they can help their clients when we know they can, and we're seeing that already. People have come to us going, "Oh, you won't do this, will you?" And it's like, "Yeah, we will." And they can change someone's life. So it's from that side of it, I think it's good.
That's really good insight. Thanks, Tony. Phil, you gave yours in December, so I'm not letting you do it again. I'm going to challenge you on an article you sent me, actually, and you could talk about brokers. So this is quite interesting. I did really like this. It's from Mortgage Introducer. Is it time to become a specialist mortgage broker? And do you remember we had a conversation a few months back, Tone, and Phil, you were there as well, about specialist lenders potentially having an issue, because obviously, all the division, all the things that changes of this year, you maybe had to be a bit more flexible in your offering. So, Phil, for your analysis on this article, but also the broker market, what are the brokers going to have to do this year? They've had a difficult year this year. They've had a difficult 4 years. Let's be fair. The last 4 years have been very, very difficult for brokers, and we have to pat them on the back for their resilience. And we've done an episode in 2023, and we'll revisit that in 24 on mental health and and identifying the issues they've had there. And I think, how is 2024 looking for them? What advice would you give them to survive another year that, as Tony just said, we don't know what's coming, but it gives us a chance to adapt? So how do the brokers manage that?
Okay, I think the bad news is that 2024 is going to be another difficult year, but it's not going to get easier. The low-hanging fruit is disappearing. The markets have been very much held up by refinancing, and we're going to have a bit of chink of light, hopefully, with rates maybe coming down fractionally, but let's not bank on that. So I think the question was, is it time to become a more specialist or complex mortgage broker? The answer is hell yes. Diversification is absolute key to being successful in 2024 and beyond. So if you're not a specialist broker or a complex, more diverse and adaptive broker, then 2024 is a really good year to become that broker. So I suppose my advice is get educated. So use your free resources around you. Talk to your lender BDMs who will spend some time with you. I know our BDMs are really happy to help shape and diversify your businesses in areas perhaps you're not comfortable with, whether that could be self-build, custom build. Look at your website.
Stop thunder. I was going to use that one.
What does your website say about your business? If it doesn't say that you do all these other things, then people aren't going to know. So, helping you with social media. Go on seminars that your clubs or mortgage networks will provide that are educational. They'll give you CPD and knowledge. There's workshops available. There's podcasts and webinars as well, just like this. So there's lots of free education available. Use it and become more diverse in what you do, because that will enrich your business and give you new income streams to go at, and you'll be adding value to your clients. And ultimately, that should lead to good outcomes for customers. So that's my answer.
I would just add to that, Jay, is just to endorse what Phil said. He's absolutely bang on. But if you are a broker and you're still not sure that you want to do it yourself, don't forget the things like packages or master brokers that will actually do it for you and help you share in that. So, that's what they're here for. And they're going to come into their own even more in this environment as things do get more challenging. So don't forget the packages.
Yeah. Align yourself with experts and in these areas of complexity and specialism, whether that's tax experts, legal experts. It's if you're aligning yourself with the right people and the right partners, that's all going to add value to your business and to your clients.
And I have to say, you go on LinkedIn and you look at some of these specialists who are featured on some of these panels. Tony, I know you do the lending lives, things like that. There are some really interesting people in there. And if you connect with them and see some of the insights they're writing and some of the articles they're writing on LinkedIn, I find it fascinating. It's where I get all my knowledge from, because these guys never talk to me anymore. Joking. But, this is where I get my knowledge from. And it's fascinating. And you find those experts and those specialists in those areas. And all of a sudden, you don't even know. I don't even know it's happening sometimes. So I'll come out with something in a room and everyone's like, how do you know about that? And it's because I take a vested interest in these people. So there's the advice then. And a little bit of prediction on 2024. Thank you, guys. We have run out of time. But Perdip, thank you again for going back and for such an insight into those two topics. It's really interesting. I mean, I sat here listening to every single word. We were all making notes. So it just proves the point. Yeah. So thank you for that summary. And do come back again later in the year, perhaps?
Thank you for inviting me back. And yes, most definitely, I can't wait for the third appearance on the amazing podcast that we're doing. One thing I just want to add, communication is key in our industry. So really, where are you ever going to find a lawyer, a broker, a lender, all speaking to each other? And the brokers that are out there listening, you need to be communicating with everybody. So yes, these podcasts are absolutely fantastic and it's key to our industry. So I cannot wait.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Tony, welcome back. And I think it's the start of a good year for us, isn't it? We're going to have a lot to talk about this year, I think.
It is. Yeah, it is a start of the year. And I've got some exciting news as well.
Don't drop it in now, because you know what the marketing team will have me for it. So don't drop it in yet. Release it in time. He's judging what he can and can't say here. Look, you can tell.
No, I can say this. This is about me. So,
okay, about you. Okay.
So in the past, we've always talked about the two sides of our coin, which is people buying a house to live in or building a house to live in, is our bag. And then we had our development finance colleagues that if you're building a house to somebody else to live in, our head of in that department is retiring and it's all coming over to me. So I can talk about both sides of that now. So we can have great discussions around how do we help builders as well as people building their own mortgages in general. So that's my exciting news. So
well, that does add some dimension to 2024 for us, then, doesn't it? If we can start talking to the builders as well, let's start drawing the audience up further.
Yeah,
love that. Congratulations.
You can cut that in or out, mate. It's up to you, but it's exciting news.
No. Yeah. To be fair, I'd forgotten you mentioned it. So let's all good. All good. I'll cut this bit out. That's great news. Yeah, let's widen the audience. I love that. I love that. So thank you, Tony. And Phil, thank you again. Phil has been breakless this year. Just like to add, Tony. So you need to make up some. So Tony, Phil needs a holiday this year, perhaps. But thank you, Phil, as always. And a happy new year to you all. And we'll see
Yes,
everyone else
thank you.
we'll be out again on the 1st of February. Don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast channels to get notifications on your phone or on email. And if you've enjoyed today, please give us a 5-star, because your recommendations let other people know where we are. So that's it from us. It's January 2024. We'll see you in February. See you guys.
See you, everybody.
Hi everyone, during the recording of SFI Not So Live in January 2024, Perdip gave us a full rundown of all the changes in the law and the rollbacks of the government that affect the buy-to-let market. It went on for 25 to 30 minutes. It's very, very interesting and very informative, so we've decided to put the whole segment on the end of the podcast. We hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for being so kind, firstly. It is a lot of detail in these bills and any proposals that the government's looking to review. So it does seem that it's a chunky document, and unfortunately it means that once they've gone back to review, there are going to be amendments, hence we're in the position that we are in today. So I'm going to speak to you obviously about the changes of the EPC and then also the Renters Reform Bill. So it may be slightly lengthy. So going back to what you said first, what were the initial proposals? So the changes in the EPC requirements, the initial proposals required all tenancies to have an EPC rating of C by the end of 2025 and all existing tenancies to comply by 2028. So that was the change. It was going to change from a minimum rating of E to C by 2025 initially. However, the government, being the government, have decided to scrap these plans. Unfortunately for some, but fortunately for others. So depending on how you work within the industry, you will be affected by this. So the point is that there is no longer going to be a change to that minimum rating. It will remain a rating of E for the foreseeable future. It doesn't mean that this plan is not going to be revisited at a later date, because this has all come about as the government's Green Review, which is designed to meet net zero targets. There have been some further changes along with this particular scrap, which I will mention. But the gist of it, if you take anything from the changes of the EPC, is that you no longer have to comply with any other minimum rating than an E. It must be E going forward. There's no changes from an E to a C at this stage. So the other changes that they mention are things like the boiler upgrade scheme grant. That's now increased to £7,500. Just a point to note, it's a pretty good grant in terms of people obviously that are not in a position to afford at this point in time with the economical situation that we're in. It is an unrepayable grant as well, so that would be very useful if you can take the benefit of that. There was also a point about the ban of installations of oil and the LPG boilers. That's also been changed. So the ban on the installation of the oil and the LPG boilers and new coal heating for off-grid homes has now been delayed from 2026 to 2035. The third exception that they've also changed is that there will be an exemption introduced for households who struggle to switch to heat pumps from 2035, which is expected to cover around about a fifth of the homes currently in the UK. Now, the obvious point is, how does this affect the landlords? How is this going to affect the tenants? Due to the announcement of the initial EPC proposals, many landlords had actually made changes to their property. So there were many landlords out there that had realised that they would need to make these changes sooner than later to be compliant. So the efficient landlords out there had paid sums of money to change that EPC rating of those properties. So they've already spent the sums to comply with the rules. For those landlords that hadn't done that, so you no longer have to, and that's the good news for the landlords personally. Now, it may be advisable to make some changes because what the government have said is they've scrapped the plans for the EPC rating to be changed. However, they are encouraging people to make changes to their properties. So they are saying to you that it's to improve the energy efficiency, and that is their main point. It's advisable in circumstances to do so. Now, if you're a landlord, the biggest benefit for you really is the financial benefit, purely because if you're going to make your property more energy efficient, you're going to have less heating bills. It's going to cost less to run that particular property, which in turn could make your property either attractive to tenants and also more cost effective. So there is that financial benefit for you. all isn't lost really, because the government have stated they are still committed to launching a consultation on minimum energy efficiency standards. But that's not going to be looked at until early 2024 to mid 2024. So there's no guarantees that these changes are not going to be reintroduced later. So just as the government have done a U-turn on the initial plans, I would not be surprised if that happens again at a later date. In terms of tenants, yes, they are affected by this as well. Now, many tenants currently are complaining that the properties that they are renting are of a very poor energy performance level. The problem with this scrapping of the particular requirements is that those tenants could still be renting properties with poor EPC levels for a longer period of time. So that's one thing to take into consideration. In terms of the way that the landlords can act, for now, those ones that have made the changes, well done, because obviously you are making those changes, and in the long run, they will help you. They will ensure that you are compliant. They will also ensure slightly cheaper cost runnings of those particular properties. So that's a help. Those ones that haven't taken any action, you can take a sigh of relief at this particular point in time. So you don't need to make those changes. So that's a significant change on the EPC proposals. Just going on to the Renters Reform Bill. So this is the slightly longer bill, and this is a lot more detailed. Just to provide you with a bit of background, again, just as you'd mentioned in the beginning, Jay, we did discuss the proposal in the last podcast. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, if you want to go back and revisit that, it would give you the background information as to the bill in a lot more detail than I'm going to cover at this particular stage. So please do listen back if you do get a chance. But there have been some significant changes that have been made. So the whole point behind the Renters Reform Bill is to bring reform, which a lot of people have argued the area in the law is actually quite outdated. So it's bringing standards for renters in line with the standards of the properties, in line with planning, in line with legislation, and in line with regulations. So that was the whole point of it. And also, it's part of the original plan for the government to improve the quality, the affordability and the fairness of the private rental sector, which they call levelling up. So on October the 20th, the government reviewed the first draft of the plan and made some rather key significant changes. The first significant change that I want to talk to you about is in relation to Section 21 of the Housing Act 1988. Now, this is commonly known as no-fault evictions. So you may recall from the previous podcast that we talked a lot about the fact that the government are looking to abolish Section 21. And just to let you know what Section 21 is, it's the landlord's statutory right. So under legislation, the landlord can serve the tenant with a notice of possession after the fixed term of the tenancy has ended. So obviously, if it's a 6-month tenancy, you have to wait for that 6 months to have been completed. At that point, landlord can serve the tenant with a notice for 2 months to say that they would like to regain possession of that property. The landlord does not need to provide a reason to action a Section 21 notice and repossess. And that's a significant part of Section 21, hence it was called, or it has been commonly known as the no-fault evictions. So the plan was to abolish this. The government have now changed that and have decided not to abolish it, which means that the landlords will still have the right to serve that Section 21 notice under the terms of this Renter Reform Bill if it is passed as it has been reconsidered. There is no indication on how long the reviews are going to take, but what the government have said is that it's not going to be abolished until sufficient progress has been made to improve the courts and the justice system. Now, many people say that the reason for this is purely because Section 21 notices, when they're then disputed, obviously then turn into a court hearing, and the processes and the way in which courts and justice system is set up at the moment, they feel that it's not sufficient enough to deal with the instances in which the Section 21 notices have been abolished and the disputes that potentially could arise between landlords and tenants. So what they're saying is the judicial system, unfortunately, as it stands, is inadequate to deal with if there is no Section 21. So that's the reason behind why the government have decided not to abolish it. Now, many people have basically, it's just an estimate as to whether or not it's going to be put back in. Many people think that it's going to be before the next general election. It could be after, but at this stage, potentially All we know is that it's been taken out, so there's no reason for a landlord at this current time to be concerned with that particular right being taken away from them. The other significant change in the Renters Reform Bill that I want to talk about is in relation to AST, so Assured Short Hold Tenancy Agreements. This is significant purely because Chapter 2 of Part 1 of the Housing Act 1988 is to be deleted as per Clause 2 of the proposed bill. Now, this is important. Chapter 2, Part 1 are basically the provisions in which the regulations behind ASTs, how you behave with an AST, are dealt with. If there's a question, you go back to that particular chapter and review what the rules are saying. So you have to ensure that you're acting in accordance with Chapter 2, Part 1. What the government are proposing is to delete it completely. What they're proposing in place of that is that any existing ASTs will be converted into ATs, and that means assured tenancies. Following the implementation of the bill. Now, obviously, that is subject to whether there's any changes going forward, but currently, as it stands, that's what they plan to do. This means landlords will no longer be able to grant ASTs, but will have ATs in place. And the point of this is to produce a single system of rolling periodic tenancies. It's very similar to the way in which tenancies have been changed in Wales. So it seems as though the government are pulling it all in line so that England and Wales are going to be acting in accordance with each other. Obviously, a slight difference. However, what they want to do is to remove the whole point of an AST. Just to make the differences between the two clear as well to you, if you're not sure. With an AST, it's an assured short hold tenancy. Normally, they're fixed for around about 6 months, up to a year, but not usually more than a year. And then following the 12 months, they then convert into a rolling periodic tenancy. With an AT, which is an assured tenancy, it's normally it's for a longer period, and that then provides the tenant with a longer security of tenure. And that's the difference. The biggest difference, like I said, is that. But in legislation, under an AST, the landlord has the automatic right to regain possession of the property once the term has expired, which is what I was referring to previously, the Section 21 right. With an AT, the landlord does not have that right. And that is a significant difference. So prior to February 1997, tenancies were commonly just these ATs, assured tenancies. And it was basically a change of legislation. So Section 96 of the Housing Act 1996 was brought in, and that's when ASTs were then coming in. So some people would argue we're actually taking 10 steps back and reverting back to the ATs as opposed to the ASTs. But again, time will tell as to this change. If it is included in the final bill, will we be better off with the ASTs being removed and the ATs being included? Not sure at this stage, but I can see that there is that argument, and it's quite a justified argument in my eyes. Point to note about these ASTs are private student lets are not excluded from this. Hence, this could lead to higher rents for students or even less availability of private student rented accommodation. So you have to understand that point. It's an argument that's being made, but again, if it is included, then we'll have to assess the situation in that basis. In terms of the impact on leasehold properties, this is rather significant. So you may have heard of the current anomaly in the drafting of the Housing Act 1988, which talks about ground rents. Now, I'll explain what that is, but the impact on this is that Clause 21 of the bill at the moment says that tenancies of 7 years plus cannot be converted to ASTs. This is important because this means that the ground rent issue for the leases with an excess of £1,000 in London and £250 outside of London falls away. And this is the anomaly that I was referring to. So currently, due to an anomaly with the drafting, leases with ground rents with an excess of £1,000 in London or £250 outside of London are at those particular rents or go above those levels where the owner occupies the property. That lease could be converted to an AST. So you've purchased a leasehold title thinking that you have the security of your leasehold title, but under the Housing Act, that can actually be converted to an AST. And obviously the whole point of the AST is that it's giving the landlord a little bit more security, and that was the reason why there was that change. So it means that if the borrower doesn't pay the rent to the landlord can action a Section 8 notice on that borrower as though they were a tenant under an AST. So it's turned your leasehold into an AST. It's then given your landlords or the freeholder the rights that they would acquire under the terms of an AST. And that's the difference. If this clause, so clause 21 of the bill, is inserted into it, it will eradicate that issue, because the long lease will not be able to turn into an AST. Hence, the landlord then can't act as though they're a landlord under the Housing Act, and they will not be able to rely on the Section 8 notice in order to evict an individual who's bought the property as opposed to renting the property. So that's the significant fact. It could eradicate this housing issue, which would be music to many lenders' ears, I have to say, and also to landlords' ears, because it then provides them with that security that they have provided the financial facility for that particular purchase, and that purchase that they have provided for will remain a leasehold and will not be then converted into an AST. So for lenders, that's good news. That takes me conveniently onto Section 8 powers under the actual bill. So Section 8 powers under the bill could mean that there's extensions to the grounds for landlords. So these are all the grounds that landlords basically can use in order to gain possession, with more of the grounds being made mandatory as opposed to discretionary as they currently are. So just to recap a little bit, in the previous podcast I've mentioned landlords can regain possession if they decide they want to move into their rental property, or if they want to sell their rental property. So they've added a little bit more definition in the current revision. If a landlord wants to move into their property, or if they want to allow their family to move into their property, they can also use this particular power to regain possession. In the bill, it also defines whom their family are. So it talks about parents, grandparents, spouses, dependents as such. And it also talks about half-blood relations, so they're very specific in defining who is covered under this particular bill. But if a landlord decides they want to evict the tenant because they want to move their family in, or they want to move themselves into that property, they are able to do so under this. Or if they decide they want to sell the property. For both of those grounds, the ASTs, so the tenancies, must have surpassed a 6 months period. Landlords must give 2 months notice to the tenants, and significantly, the landlord cannot relet or market the property within 3 months of serving that notice. So it can't be that the landlord it may be that they have the intention to do so, to live in the property, to occupy it, or to sell it. But it can't be that the landlords then use it as an excuse to get the tenants evicted from the property. So that's quite significant in that. So 3 months, they cannot do anything as soon as they have served that notice. Otherwise, they will be in breach of that particular ground. Now, landlords also have under Section 8 a ground that they can evict antisocial tenants. There has been a change from the original bill with this particular one. So the notice period is still 2 weeks if you have an antisocial tenant and you wish to have them evicted. However, they have changed a little bit of the referencing within the bill, and allegedly this is supposed to make it easier for landlords to demonstrate. So what they've done is they've replaced the reference to guilty of behaviour causing or likely to cause nuisance or annoyance with capable of causing. So they assume that it would be easier for landlords to show that those particular tenants are capable of causing that particular behaviour or the annoyance or the nuisance. So allegedly this is supposed to make landlords' lives easier. Again, it's in there now. Let's see what happens in the future. In terms of recapping for tenants with repeated rent arrears, again, you need to have 2 months rent unpaid for at least 1 day on 3 or more separate occasions. Landlord must provide 4 weeks notice. For tenants with 2 months arrears, you need to provide the 4-week notice. So there's no particular change on that point, other than adding the detail of at least 1 day on 3 occasions or more separate. So that's the wording that they've added for the repeated rent arrears. The landlord under Section 8 can also regain possession from full-time students. This has been changed, again, at the revision of the government's inspections. What they've now inserted is that possession can be gained at the end of the academic year. So from the period of June to September, when there's no need for the particular students to be in the property at that point, the landlord can serve the notice on those tenants. Obviously, they must provide a 2-month notice, which seems to be the standard across the board, apart from where they've had the 4-week notice with rent arrears. This only applies to student-let HMOs. So if it's a HMO, the landlord is then allowed to regain possession under this particular ground to let the property again to students. So it allows them to go in, carry out changes. It also allows them to improve the property if they need to make significant changes, and then they can go and look for another tenant and they can market the property at that particular point. However, that is a revision because that was not included originally in that detail in the first one. So really, in terms of the Section 8 powers, what they're saying is that all the evictions will have to be based on an approved reason, be it mandatory or be it a discretionary ground, but they must be provided by the landlord through serving a Section 8 notice. Again, like I said, it is subject to further review. There's no doubt that amendments will actually be made at some point. But the points to consider are really, are landlords going to get more control over their properties? I mean, not only are the Section 21 reinstatement for now, and they've also provided further clarification on Section 8 grounds, or is it that Section 21 will actually be abolished, giving the tenants the security of tenure? That's a point to consider. I can't answer that question, and I'm sure there's nobody out there that can, because we can't convict and predict exactly what the government are going to say. So it's one of those situations where we just have to watch this space. One of the changes that is very significant in terms of the rent and how this can be charged in the Renters Reform Bill is a brand new procedure that has been inserted in the bill. So in order for a landlord to increase the rent, the landlord will have to complete what's called a Section 13 form. They must complete this form and serve it with a 2-month notice period on the tenant, with the details being proposed for the rent increase. Now, if the tenant accepts, the rent would then change from the day after the notice period has ended. And if the tenant disputes the increase, they would have to refer the case to the first tier tribunal. Point to note really is that rent increases can only be done once a year. So this process can only be entered into once a year for a landlord. This is different to when they had ASTs. If you had an AST that was based on a 6-month period, you could increase that rent after that 6-month period. So this is limited for landlords for 1 year, possibly a positive for tenants, but again, something to review. One of the points that I'm going to mention now is actually something that made me laugh, to be honest. The Section 7, where a tenant has a right to request consent to keep a pet. Now, this seems to have caused quite an uproar within the industry between landlords and tenants. Lots and lots of people want to keep pets within their property, and it does seem a very significant point. Now, the change that's been brought about here is that the tenant under that Section 7 will have a right to request the consent to keep a pet on the property. However, this consent is not to be unreasonably refused by the landlord. Landlords have unfortunately not been so taking on this point. It's not as popular amongst landlords, because the landlord's argument is that having the pet on the property causes further wear and tear that would not be there if that pet wasn't there. Further works that would have to be carried out in order on a change of an AST. Obviously, for the individual tenants that have always had a pet or want a pet on the property, they feel they should have the right to ask that. This particular bill gives them the right to ask that, and it also gives them the right to then question the landlord as well, because if the landlord refuses, they have to show that they are not being unreasonable by refusing. So it's an interesting point. The bill also talks about discrimination, and this is quite interesting. So the landlords under the bill cannot refuse to let to tenants on the basis that they have children, or on the basis that they are in receipt of benefits. The point of this has really been to stop levels of discrimination within the tenancy market, so that everybody has a level playing field across the board. And then finally, I just want to mention, just in relation to the Property Ombudsman Scheme, again, I'd mentioned that in the previous podcast, what they have said now is that the landlords will have to sign up to a Property Ombudsman Scheme, and there is a penalty if you fail to join that scheme. It's firstly that enforcement action could be taken. There's a financial penalty that is currently being considered up to the value of £30,000. And finally, and this is quite significant, a landlord could face criminal prosecution for failing to comply and sign up to this particular scheme. So it's not actually complying with any decision from the Ombudsman that gives you that penalty. It's actually failing to sign up to it. Obviously, landlords will have to abide by the Ombudsman's decisions following a dispute settlement, and that comes as part and parcel of the Ombudsman's dispute. However, it's a significant penalty of just failing to sign up. What the government are trying to do, and what it seems here, is that they're trying to put the onus on these landlords to make sure that they are signing up to the redress schemes such as this, so that they are then held accountable in circumstances which they should be. And that's a positive for tenants. Obviously, for landlords, you do need to ensure that you sign up to it, because if you don't, like I said, you'll face potentially enforcement action, which could result in financial penalty or even that criminal prosecution, which I'm sure you would like to avoid. Just to finish on the point of the rental reform bill, I could talk for quite a long point of time on this. It is a draft bill, so there are going to be changes. So when the government go back and revise this bill and re-inspect and reconsider the proposals, there will be changes, no doubt. So currently that's where we stand. We will have to wait, obviously, till the next time that they review the bill to find out more. Now, in terms of the effect that this would then have on the buy-to-let market and what the changes have actually brought about currently, or to the tail end of 2023, basically what I'm seeing, and this is my perspective and what we've assessed here at Blacks, landlords are assessing their profitability and investments due to many factors, not just the cost of living, but obviously the mortgage costs and fluctuating interest rates. Obviously, because we act for many landlords, when I speak to them, and I have spoken to them in detail about the EPC changes and the rental reform bills, they are concerned. But what they're looking to do, and what I've seen a trend of, is that they are now assessing the financial stability at this stage and are trying to make those changes, the EPC changes. There is a little bit of unsurety as to where this proposal is going to go, and the sheer detail in the final draft obviously will make a difference. But because they're refinancing their portfolios, they're looking at achieving their higher profits at this stage. So that is a positive, and that's something that they're conscious of the fact that this is going to affect them. They're also wanting to know as much detail as possible, but also are aware that this is subject to change. So at this day and age, what they're doing is refinancing or reassessing as at today's date, but bearing in mind that that is something that is due to come going forward in the foreseeable future. Now, based on our analysis of number of instructions and client discussions that I've had, and also stats that I have run through our systems, we've actually seen an increase in established landlords making purchases as a result of this. Now, again, like I said, I think it is purely because of the changes to the EPC and the Renters Reform Bill, where we potentially saw a little bit of a drop of activity just upon the anniversary of the review, and following that, because I do feel that the market is strengthening, albeit it may not be at a pace that I would like it to be, landlords do seem to be looking at that as a positive, and those instructions and the conversations that we're having with private landlords seem to be fitting with this. They're not as anxious, they understand a lot more is to come, but they have it in the back of their minds and they understand how this is going to affect their portfolios.